Ancient prophetic texts have always caused fascination and disquiet in the human heart. Enigmatic passages about nations rising and falling, signs in the heavens and on earth, and the mysterious silence about some of today's greatest powers. In these millennia-old descriptions we find not only sacred history, but a mirror for our contemporary reality, where patterns repeat themselves with surprising precision. What would happen if we looked at our current world through the lens of ancient prophecies? What would we see when we compared our enlightened cities, our advanced technologies, and our modern values with the Babylon described in the sacred scriptures? Are we witnessing the silent fulfillment of predictions made millennia ago, while we heedlessly follow the same path of civilizations that collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance? One of the greatest enigmas in eschatological prophecy is the apparent absence of the United States of America. How can it be explained that the greatest military and economic power in the modern world does not figure nominally in prophetic descriptions of the final events? This question has puzzled theologians and scholars for generations, generating theories that seek to understand this deafening silence in the scriptures. When we examine the nations mentioned in the prophecies of the last days, we find clear references to ancient and modern powers. Gog is often interpreted as a title of leadership, while Magog would correspond to a territory that many associate with the region of present-day Russia. Persia, today known as Iran, is explicitly mentioned as an ally in the great invasion led by Magog. Wouldn't it be wise to ignore how these ancient descriptions seem to align with the geopolitical tensions we observe today? The kings of the East, mentioned in the prophetic texts, suggest a vast coalition of powers from east of the Euphrates River, possibly led by China. This description becomes even more realistic when we look at China's growing economic and military power in the 21st century, and its expansionist influence. With each political and economic maneuver in the Far East, aren't we witnessing the gradual positioning of the pieces on the prophetic chessboard? The ten-horned beast is interpreted by many scholars as a revitalized form of the Roman Empire, possibly a confederation of 10 nations. Many point to the European Union or a future coalition of Western powers as the fulfillment of this prophecy. Curious how modern political structures seem to mirror configurations predicted millennia ago, isn't it? But the silence on America remains. One theory suggests that the United States will face a significant decline before the end. Some believe that the country will suffer a moral or economic collapse that will render it insignificant when the final global events unfold. Aren't the signs of this possible decline already visible in political polarization, recurring economic crises, and the gradual erosion of traditional values? Another perspective suggests that America will be absorbed into a unified global system. This theory proposes that the United States will lose its sovereignty, becoming just one of many nations under a single world government. Couldn't the advance of globalist agendas, international protocols, and progressive economic integration be indications of this process of dissolving national sovereignties in favor of global governance structures? A third interpretation, perhaps the most biblically grounded, is that America is simply not relevant to the central focus of the prophecies. This view recognizes that the biblical prophetic lens is centered on Israel and the nations that directly affect its destiny, not on the West itself. Israel, that small nation risen from the ashes after 2 millennia, remains the divine prophetic clock, regardless of how powerful other nations are. We could also consider the hypothesis that America is present in the prophecies, but under symbols or descriptions that we have not yet fully identified. The scriptures often use symbolic and metaphorical language. Could some description of a maritime power, a land beyond the seas, or even some aspect of Babylon indirectly refer to American influence in the world? The absence of America in the final prophecies invites us to reflect deeply on the transience of human powers. Rome considered itself eternal, just like Babylon, Persia, and so many other empires that faded away like morning mist. Aren't we facing a lesson in the ephemerality of every human power that rises in disregard of eternal principles? This reflection should not lead us to despair, but to vigilant wisdom. If the greatest human powers are fleeting on the stage of divine history, where should we place our trust and hope? Perhaps the apparent prophetic silence about America is in itself an eloquent message about where we should not place our ultimate security. Babylon is not just a historical city, but a powerful symbol that resonates throughout the ages. Mentioned more than 250 times in the sacred scriptures, it ranks as the second most cited city, surpassed only by Jerusalem. This contrast is no accident. If Jerusalem represents the city of God, Babylon embodies its spiritual opposite, the worldly system in rebellion against divine principles. In apocalyptic visions, Babylon reappears not as a specific geographical location, but as a spiritual entity that embodies everything that opposes the divine order. Revelation chapter 18 verse 21 presents a striking image. A mighty angel took up a stone the size of a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "With the same violence the great city of Babylon will be overthrown, and it will never be found again." Isn't this an impressive description of the final judgment against the worldly systems that rise up in opposition to God? The symbolic language of Revelation chapter 17 describes Babylon as the great prostitute who sits on many waters, intoxicating the inhabitants of the world with the wine of her immorality. What more accurate image could we have of a global system that seduces entire nations with promises of pleasure, power, and prosperity unlinked from any moral responsibility or accountability to a higher power? This mysterious woman is depicted sitting on a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, covered in blasphemies. On her forehead is written a name, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Isn't this the perfect portrait of how political and economic systems often ally themselves with apostate religious structures in order to exercise dominion over peoples? How can we not recognize in this description the marriages of convenience between power and false spirituality that we have witnessed throughout history? When we look at contemporary culture, don't we find the same Babylonian patterns of rebellion? What was once recognized as moral transgression is now celebrated as liberation and progress. Extreme individualism has elevated the I to the status of a personal deity, while the unbridled quest for instant pleasure has become the new social gospel. Are we not witnessing the flourishing of the Babylonian spirit in our own time? The prophetic description of Babylon as a habitation of demons, a den of every foul spirit, and a hiding place for every unclean and detestable bird, reveals the spiritual nature behind the outward appearances of grandeur and splendor. While modern Babylon displays its gleaming skyscrapers, its advanced technology and its promises of human utopia, wouldn't a deeper look reveal the same spiritual forces at work behind the scenes? The Babylonian system is characterized by its drunkenness, adultery, gluttony, and excessive luxury. The nations drink of its wine, the kings of the earth commit adultery with it, and the merchants grow rich on its excessive luxury. Isn't this exactly what we see in today's global economic system? A system that promotes compulsive consumerism, unbridled accumulation, and indiscriminate exploitation of natural resources, all in the name of infinite growth on a finite planet? While historical Babylon fell due to its sins and debauchery, the symbolic Babylon of our day presents the same structural vulnerabilities. Greed, materialism, and the quest for power at any cost are forces that corrode any civilization from within. Aren't recurring economic crises, global pandemics, and environmental disasters warnings that our civilizational foundations are compromised? The most frightening thing about the Babylonian analogy is how easily we become part of the system without even realizing it. Like fish that don't recognize the water they're swimming in, we're so immersed in the Babylonian mentality that we often don't question it. How many of us build our own little personal empires, focused on our name and glory, instead of seeking eternal values? The big question everyone should ask themselves is not whether Babylon exists today, but to what extent each of us participates in and perpetuates its values. Are we building our life projects on Babylonian foundations or on eternal principles? Are we seeking to make our own name great or living for a greater purpose that transcends our individual existence? At the beginning of post-Diluvian human history, an emblematic figure emerges who would set the standard for organized rebellion against the divine order, Nimrod. Described in Genesis chapter 10 verses 8 to 10 as the first to become mighty in the land and a valiant hunter before the Lord, his name is often translated as "we will rebel" or "we will revolt," a statement of intent that would define not only his life, but the character of Gentile nations throughout history. Nimrod's rise represents the first systematic attempt to create a centralized human empire after the flood. The sacred text tells us that the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. It is not insignificant that his first domain is identified as Babel, the embryo of what would become mighty Babylon. Here we find the genesis of the Babylonian spirit that would mark subsequent civilizations. Unlike the patriarchs who lived in tents and recognized themselves as pilgrims on earth, Nimrod established cities and consolidated power. His approach was not to submit to the divine plan, but to implement an alternative vision centered on man. Don't we see the same paradigm repeated in modern humanist ideologies that seek to create earthly utopias independent of any transcendent reference? The historian Josephus offers us a glimpse of Nimrod's defiant character when he writes, "He also said that he would take revenge on God if God had in mind to flood the world again, for he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach and would avenge the destruction of his ancestors." Doesn't this attitude of explicit defiance of divine authority reflect the same spirit of rebellious autonomy that permeates our contemporary culture? Nimrod not only rejected divine authority, but established an alternative system of power, resulting in a new configuration of human power, independent of divine will. As a brave hunter, he probably won popular support for his ability to protect people from wild beasts in a hostile post-Diluvian world. Isn't that how many authoritarian leaders gain legitimacy? By offering security in exchange for submission? The pattern is always the same: earthly protection replacing divine provision. The construction of the Tower of Babel, closely associated with Nimrod's legacy, represents the human attempt to reach the divine through self-effort. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Don't we recognize here the same impulse that drives contemporary humanity in its technological and architectural achievements? The search for transcendence without submission? Nimrod's Babylonian project had a dual function: to create a monument to human ingenuity, let us make a name for ourselves, and to prevent the scattering ordered by God, lest we be scattered. It was essentially a rejection of the divine command to fill the earth and subdue it. Instead of spreading out to steward creation as God's stewards, Nimrod's followers sought to centralize power and glory. How many empires have risen and fallen following this same logic? Nimrod's legacy transcended his time, establishing an archetype of leadership characterized by tyranny and apostasy. As the first king of Babylon, he embodied the nature and character that would exist in the Gentile nations throughout history, especially in their final manifestation during the tribulation. His type of leadership continues to resurface in different historical and cultural contexts, always with the same fundamental characteristics. The divine intervention against the Babylonian project, the confusion of tongues, demonstrates that, despite all human arrogance, God remains sovereign over history. Babylon was humiliated, and it was shown that, ultimately, only God is king. This lesson would be repeated countless times throughout human history, with empires arising, proclaiming their own inviolability, and then falling inexorably. Isn't our global civilization following the same pattern towards a similar outcome? The spirit of Nimrod, self-sufficient, rebellious, centralizing and self-glorifying, continues to manifest itself in political, economic, and even religious structures in our time. Whenever we see leaders or systems that seek to replace God, concentrate excessive power, and build monuments to their own glory, we are witnessing the resurgence of the Nimrodian archetype. The crucial question is, are we, individually and collectively, following the path of Nimrod or choosing a different journey? If Nimrod laid the foundation of the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar represents its fullest and most powerful expression in ancient history. As ruler of Babylon at its height, he not only conquered nations, including Israel, taking many captives to his land, but also manifested the perfect paradigm of human arrogance taken to the extreme. His reign offers us a case study in how absolute power, devoid of fear of the divine, corrupts absolutely. The encounter between Babylonian culture and God's captive people created a clash of worldviews that resonates to this day. Imagine the situation of the young Israelites uprooted from their homeland, forced to learn a new language, absorb new customs, and adapt to a radically different society. Isn't this the pressure that many believers face today? The demand to assimilate into a prevailing culture that contradicts their deepest values? The story of Daniel in the lion's den illustrates this conflict perfectly. When the royal decree forbade praying to any god except the king, Daniel refused to compromise his faith. His civil disobedience was not motivated by rebellion, but by loyalty to a higher kingdom. How many today face similar dilemmas? When human laws begin to contradict divine principles, Daniel's calm but firm response remains an eternal model for all who face such crossroads. The narrative of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reveals Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance even more clearly. The construction of a huge golden statue for self-adoration and the demand that everyone prostrate themselves before it on pain of death exemplifies the pinnacle of human self-divinization. "Who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" he asked, exposing the delusion common to all tyrants, the belief in their own absolute power. Nebuchadnezzar's inordinate pride manifests itself not only in his actions, but in the very structure of his government. The creation of regular moments of national worship in his image, the establishment of himself as an object of prayer, and the severe punishment for any form of dissent reveal a system totally centered on the glorification of the leader. Don't we recognize elements of this same cult of personality in various authoritarian regimes throughout history and even in the present? The obsession with building grandiose monuments as a testimony to his power also characterized Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the magnificent reconstruction of the city with its imposing walls and ornate gates were physical manifestations of his desire for immortality through human works. How can we not see parallels in our time, when nations and corporations compete to build the tallest skyscrapers as symbols of their power and prestige? The turning point in Nebuchadnezzar's story comes when, admiring the grandeur of Babylon from the top of his palace, he declares, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built as the capital of my kingdom, with my great power, for the glory of my majesty?" At the exact moment of this declaration, a voice from heaven announces his judgment. His inordinate pride triggered his downfall, a timeless lesson for leaders and nations. Nebuchadnezzar's subsequent period of madness, when he lived like an animal in the field for 7 years, represents a divine humiliation designed not to destroy him, but to restore him to a correct perspective. At the end of this period, he raised his eyes to heaven, his understanding returned, and he blessed the Most High, recognizing that all the inhabitants of the earth are considered as nothing, and he acts according to his will. No one can stop his hand or question him, "What have you done?" This profound transformation of Nebuchadnezzar reminds us that even the hearts most hardened by power and pride can be transformed when confronted with divine sovereignty. His final testimony represents one of the most remarkable confessions of faith in Scripture by a Gentile ruler. "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt and glorify the King of heaven, for all that he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble." The parallel with our times is inevitable. We live in an age of unprecedented human self-divinization, where technology seems to have made us gods of our own destiny, where science promises physical immortality, and where the serpent's ancient promise, "You shall be as gods," resonates with every new human achievement. Don't we need equal humiliation to recognize our true position in the cosmos? Or will we choose to learn from Nebuchadnezzar's experience before repeating his mistake? Societies are never static entities. They evolve, transform, and change as significant events shape their structures and values. Looking back in history, we can identify decisive moments that profoundly altered the social fabric. The persecution of Christians under Nero in the Roman Empire, the new patterns of success during the Victorian era in Britain, the drastic transformations during the Great Depression of 1929, and the changes in financial habits after the crisis of 2008. Each social transformation carries with it a meaning, especially when observed through the prophetic lens. The scriptures leave no ambiguity about the specific changes that will characterize the end times before Christ's return. In 1 Timothy chapter 4 verses 1-2, we find a precise description. The Spirit clearly says that in the last time some will abandon the faith, giving heed to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, through the hypocrisy of liars, who have a seared conscience. This mass abandonment of the faith, a widespread apostasy, is clearly manifested in our day through the emptying of traditional churches in historically Christian nations, the growing population that identifies itself as without religion, and the progressive marginalization of Christian values in public discourse and government policies. Aren't these clear signs of the prophetic fulfillment taking place before our eyes? Particularly significant is the prediction that people will listen to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. Today we observe an unprecedented thirst for the supernatural detached from traditional religious structures, the exponential growth of non-theistic spiritualist practices, the fascination with mystical experiences a la carte, and the popularization of ancient occult practices repackaged as spiritual well-being or self-improvement. How can we not recognize in these trends the literal fulfillment of prophetic words? The proliferation of hypocrisy and lies as dominant social features also characterizes our time. We live in the era of post-truth, where objective facts have less influence in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal beliefs. Systematic disinformation, fake news, and the manipulation of the truth by political and economic interests have created a society where discerning the truth has become extraordinarily difficult. Isn't this the ideal environment for the rise of deceptive leaders prophesied for the end times? Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this social metamorphosis is the seared conscience mentioned in the prophetic text. A seared conscience is one that has lost its sensitivity, that no longer responds to the moral stimuli with which it should be alarmed. Isn't this exactly what we witness when moral atrocities are normalized, when graphic violence becomes common entertainment, and when behaviors that were once universally recognized as destructive are celebrated as expressions of individual freedom? The erosion of traditional family values also figures prominently in prophetic descriptions of the last days. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 to 5, we are warned that, in the last days hard times will come, characterized among other things by people disobedient to parents, without love for family, loving pleasures more than God. The disintegration of the family unit, the questioning of fundamental roles such as fatherhood and motherhood, and the prioritization of individual gratification over family commitments are clear signs that this prophesied social transformation is in full swing. Technological advances, particularly in the field of instant global communication, have also set the stage for the fulfillment of specific prophecies. In Revelation chapter 11 verse 9, we read that people from all peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will simultaneously behold the bodies of the two witnesses in Jerusalem, a technical impossibility until the advent of satellite and internet transmissions. The technological infrastructure needed for the final prophetic events is not only available today, it is omnipresent in our daily lives. Revelation chapter 13 verses 16 to 17 describes a global economic system where no one will be able to buy or sell without a specific mark. Until recently, such centralized economic control would have been technically impossible. Today, with the decline of physical money, the advance of digital currencies controlled by central banks, and social credit systems already implemented in some nations, the infrastructure for such a system is rapidly taking shape. Isn't it frightening to realize how innovations presented as conveniences can easily turn into unprecedented tools of control? Growing hostility towards authentic Christian values has also been clearly predicted for the last days. Jesus warned, "You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake." Matthew chapter 24 verse 9. Biblical Christianity, once respected even by its critics, is now often portrayed as a source of intolerance and an obstacle to social progress. Doesn't the marginalization of Christian perspectives in educational institutions, the media and legislative processes confirm precisely this aspect of end times prophecy? Despite this challenging scenario, the scriptures offer unshakable hope for those who remain faithful. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world, 1 John chapter 4 verse 4 reminds us. Jesus Christ stands as the pure and holy light that drives out all darkness. Even when divine values are scorned in public discourse, even when hearts become cold due to the prevalence of sin, there is a promise for those who persevere. When the enemy comes like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will lift up a standard against him. As it was in the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. These words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 verse 37 establish a direct correlation between the time that preceded the flood and the period that will precede his glorious return. This comparison is not incidental. It is an essential interpretative key for understanding our own times and discerning the signs of the imminent conclusion of human history. What characterized society in Noah's day? Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 offers a devastating portrait. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man had increased on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was always and only toward evil. This description suggests not just isolated immoral behaviors, but a deep and systemic corruption of human consciousness itself. Evil wasn't just practiced, it was celebrated, cultivated, and passed on as a cultural legacy. Widespread violence also marked that pre-Diluvian society. The earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence, declares Genesis chapter 6 verse 11. This was not just physical violence, but a comprehensive perversion of the natural order established by God, a distortion of relationships, social structures, and the very relationship between humanity and creation. Don't we witness such multidimensional violence today? Physical, psychological, spiritual, ecological? Jesus adds another crucial detail about the days of Noah. People ate, drank, married, and were given in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. Life went on with apparent normality, with people absorbed in their daily activities, completely oblivious to the impending catastrophe. Isn't this also the characteristic of our time? A superficial normality masking a deep spiritual crisis, while we carry on with our routines as if everything were fine. The technological explosion of our time exponentially amplifies the potential for evil that characterized the age of Noah. Today, advanced communication technologies facilitate the instant dissemination of destructive ideologies. Digital platforms enable new types of exploitation, and artificial intelligence opens up unprecedented possibilities for manipulation and control. Knowledge has increased dramatically, as predicted in Daniel chapter 12 verse 4, but without a corresponding growth in moral wisdom. The contemporary entertainment industry provides another disturbing parallel to the days of Noah. Through movies, music, games, and social media, behaviors that Scripture clearly identifies as self-destructive are glorified and celebrated. The line between virtue and vice has not only been blurred, in many cases it has been completely inverted, with vice being presented as virtue and virtue ridiculed as weakness. Isn't this moral inversion a sign of the end times? The unbridled hedonism that marked the days of Noah, with its emphasis on immediate gratification without regard for future consequences, finds a perfect parallel in contemporary consumer culture. "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die," could easily be the unstated slogan of a generation obsessed with experiences, possessions, and temporary pleasures, while questions of eternal significance are relegated to the background or ignored altogether. Perhaps the most disturbing parallel between our time and the days of Noah is the manipulation of human nature itself. Some scholars interpret the enigmatic reference to the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 as indicating some kind of corruption of the human lineage. Although interpretations vary, it is remarkable that we live in an age where genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and transhumanist technologies promise to enhance or even transcend humanity as it was designed by the Creator. Isn't this the height of rebellious arrogance? In the midst of this challenging scenario, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and was described as righteous and upright among the people of his day. He walked with God, maintaining intimate communion with the Creator in a culture that had completely rejected divine values. His unwavering faithfulness in a hostile environment remains an inspiring model for all who seek to remain faithful in our own generation of Noahs. The most important question each person must face is not whether we are living in the days similar to Noah's. The evidence strongly suggests that we are, but how we will respond to this reality. Will we be like the crowd who continued with their daily activities, ignoring the signs and warnings until it was too late? Or will we be like Noah, who, moved by holy fear, built an ark for the salvation of his family, becoming heir to the righteousness that comes by faith? The fast-approaching truck is visible on the horizon. The choice of where to run is entirely ours. Faced with these revelations, each of us is faced with a fundamental choice. Will we remain engrossed in our daily routines, ignoring the signs around us, or will we awaken to the deeper spiritual reality that is unfolding and seek refuge in the eternal truth that remains unshakable, even as the systems of this world begin to crumble? If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.